There's a certain kind of emptiness that doesn't come from lack. It comes from forgetting. Not forgetting your keys or your appointments, but forgetting something far deeper. Something that used to glow quietly at the center of you. Your soul. That strange, wordless sense of inner life that made you feel real as a child. That whispered to you through art, through stillness, through wonder. It's still there, but now it's buried under calendars, deadlines, curated identities, and performance reviews. You don't remember when it happened. Just that, somewhere between school and social media, your soul became optional. And you became productive, efficient, acceptable, but not whole, not alive in that raw, aching, human way. This isn't a video about religion, it's about the quiet violence of a system that made your soul feel inconvenient, and how you learned to agree. The disappearance of the soul in a world obsessed with surfaces. It starts early. Long before you know the word soul. You're born into a world that doesn't ask who you are, but what you can do. You're praised not for your wonder, but for your performance. You draw something with your tiny hands, and someone says, "You're so talented," not, "What did this drawing mean to you?" You say something honest and weird, and they laugh. Because honesty is charming when you're small, but embarrassing when you grow older. And so the great forgetting begins. The forgetting of the part of you that lives beneath the image, beneath the grades, beneath the approval. By the time you're in school, your worth has already become transactional. It's in your report card, your ability to sit still, to follow instructions, to produce results. Nobody asks what you're curious about. Nobody values your silences. And certainly, no one teaches you to listen to the voice within, the quiet one, the one that speaks not in sentences but in sensations. That voice doesn't belong in standardized tests. It doesn't follow deadlines. It doesn't raise its hand. So you mute it. You learn quickly that there are rewards for obedience. That if you perform well enough, you'll be called smart, mature, promising. And so like most of us, you adjust, you adapt, you begin to outsource your identity. You learn how to be a good student, a good worker, a good citizen, but never how to be a soul. Nietzsche warned about this. He said society values the tame, not the true. It praises the herd animal, not the free spirit. You go to your neighbor and you seek yourself, he wrote, but you do that in vain because the self is in you. But what happens in a culture that encourages us to look everywhere but within? We become strangers to ourselves. You can go your entire adult life thinking you are your resume, your relationship status, your carefully filtered photos. You can forget that you are more than a brand, more than a tool, more than a bio. You forget how to be still, how to sit with discomfort, how to feel something deeply without needing to tweet it, explain it, justify it. And that forgetting comes at a cost. The cost is subtle but constant. You feel it when you scroll endlessly through curated lives that all look happier than yours. You feel it when you're surrounded by people, but still feel alone. You feel it when you're lying in bed at night, exhausted. Not from living, but from pretending. Because here's the truth no one says out loud. Performing all the time is soul depleting. Smiling when you don't mean it. Saying yes when you want to scream no. Keeping quiet so you don't offend. Working jobs you hate to afford things you don't need to impress people you don't even like. You can only fake it for so long before something inside you starts to wither. Carl Jung called that part yourself with a capital S. The whole you. The you that exists before the conditioning. The you that dreams, that aches, that knows. He said we're born with it and we spend our lives trying to reconnect with it. But most people never do. Most people live in the mask, the persona, as Jung called it, the face we show to the world, not because we're liars, but because we're terrified. Terrified that if we show our real face, we'll be rejected, shamed, abandoned. So we become masters of adaptation. We fit into the system. We chase external markers of success. We call it ambition, but often it's just fear in disguise. We stop asking deep questions because they lead to uncomfortable truths. We stop listening to our intuition because it disrupts our plans. We stop creating art, writing poetry, dancing in our rooms, because those things don't scale. They don't make money, they don't build careers, they just feed the soul. And feeding the soul doesn't show up on performance reviews. So we starve it. We laugh without joy. We cry in secret. We keep ourselves busy because slowing down would mean facing the silence. And in that silence, we might hear the voice we've been ignoring for years. The voice that doesn't care about your productivity. The one that's not impressed by your LinkedIn profile. The one that whispers, "This isn't who you are." And what do we do with that voice? We mute it again. With noise, with goals, with caffeine, with scrolling, with perfectionism, with spiritual bypassing, we say, "I'll rest when I retire," or "I'm fine, just busy," or "This is just how life is." And maybe it is. But then why does it feel so hollow? The answer isn't to quit your job and live in the forest, though some days that's tempting. The answer isn't even to reject society, it's to see it clearly. To realize that the world you've adapted to was never designed to nourish your soul. It was designed to keep the machine running. And you were taught to become a cog, a polite, efficient, likable cog. But you were never meant to be a cog. You were meant to be a being, one that breathes deeply, feels fully, thinks freely, and yes, suffers but also creates, loves, wonders, stretches, doubts, lives. And the fact that this feels like a revelation tells you everything you need to know about the system we were raised in. It trained you to ignore your soul, but that doesn't mean you can't remember. When success becomes a distraction from the self. Let's talk about success, not the fluffy motivational kind. The real kind, the one you were taught to crave like oxygen. The one tied to numbers, trophies, job titles, and applause. The kind that looks amazing from the outside, even if it leaves you hollow on the inside. Somewhere along the way, success stopped being a celebration of your spirit and became a cover-up for its absence. You weren't taught to ask, "Does this bring me alive?" You were taught to ask, "Does this make me better than others? Does it give me status? Is it impressive? Will it shut people up?" That's the quiet engine behind so much modern ambition. Not joy, not purpose, not soul, but fear. Fear of being average, fear of being invisible, fear of not being enough. So you build, you grind, you sacrifice, and all the while you drift. Because real success, soulful success, asks a different question. Not how much, but how true. And here's where things get complicated. Because the world rewards the mask, the polished image, the high-functioning shell. You might be dying inside, but if you're punctual, polite, and productive, you're praised. You might be completely disconnected from yourself, but if your bank account looks good, your LinkedIn profile sparkles, and your Instagram feed is curated, you're winning, right? This is how society trains you to betray yourself. Not through force, but through flattery. It teaches you to confuse performance with value. The more you perform, the more you're affirmed. And slowly, without even noticing, you begin to outsource your worth to the reaction of others. If they approve, you must be doing something right. If they're impressed, you must be on the right path. And if they're not, panic. Question everything. Work harder. This is how your soul becomes a side character in your own life. It doesn't scream, it sighs. It doesn't argue, it retreats. And in its absence, you become what others expect you to be. A mirror, a product, a brand. But not a person, not really. Jung would say this is the beginning of neurosis, the split between your outer life and your inner truth. You live one reality publicly while another truth festers in your private world. You play the role, but something doesn't feel right. There's a mismatch between your face and your feelings. And the longer you ignore that tension, the heavier it becomes. But you've been told that heaviness is just stress, that it can be solved with productivity hacks and better sleep and a 5-step morning routine. You've been told to treat your soul like a project to optimize. Meditate, but only if it makes you more focused. Do yoga, but post it on Instagram. Journal, but make sure it's aesthetically pleasing. Even your healing becomes content. Even your pain must perform. And through all this, the real you, your inner life, your longings, your confusion, your wonder, gets lost in translation. It's not that you don't care, it's that you've been conditioned not to notice. There's no space in your calendar for feeling lost. There's no job title for soul searching. There's no algorithm that rewards stillness. So you keep running, not toward anything, just away, from silence, from truth, from yourself. But here's the quiet paradox. The faster you run, the more lost you feel. And the more lost you feel, the more you try to prove that you're not. So you succeed harder, you work longer, you say yes more, you win more awards, and with each new milestone, the emptiness grows louder. Not because you're failing, but because you're succeeding at the wrong things. Because here's what no one tells you. The soul doesn't care about your resume. It doesn't care how many followers you have or how much money you make. It cares whether you're honest, whether you're alive, whether your life feels like yours. But society doesn't teach you to ask those questions. It teaches you to look outside for validation, for direction, for meaning. And so you become a master of meeting other people's expectations, while quietly forgetting your own. You play the role of the successful person so well that even you start to believe it. Until one day you don't. Until one day the applause fades, or the title loses its shine, or the goal is reached, and nothing changes. You don't feel better, you don't feel whole, you just feel tired, empty. Like you've been running a marathon toward a finish line that keeps moving. And in that moment, something cracks. Not a breakdown, necessarily. Sometimes just a quiet realization. A sentence you whisper to yourself when no one's watching. I don't think this is it. It doesn't matter what this is. The job, the relationship, the identity, the dream. Whatever it is, it doesn't fit anymore. And once you admit that, even silently, the spell begins to break. Because deep down, a part of you remembers what it was like to be curious without needing to monetize it, to rest without guilt, to create without strategy, to speak without scripting, to exist without explanation. That part of you isn't gone. It's just been buried under layers of performance, fear, and cultural conditioning. But it's still there, waiting. The question is, are you ready to listen? Numb is the new normal. You'd think we would notice when our soul starts to fade, that we'd feel it like a sharp, sudden pain. But no, that would be too easy. The loss doesn't scream, it sedates. It's a quiet forgetting. You don't even realize it's happening until the colors in your life start to look a little duller. Food loses taste, music stops moving you, conversations become noise. You're alive, technically, but not quite living. Because here's the thing, society doesn't train you to feel. It trains you to function, to keep going, even when everything inside you wants to stop. And the best way to keep you going is to make feeling optional or even dangerous. Emotions, after all, are inefficient. They make you pause, they disrupt the schedule, they complicate things. You can't measure grief on a spreadsheet. You can't monetize awe. So what do? We numb. And we call it adulthood. We call it being strong. We reward stoicism, especially in men. We teach children to say, "I'm fine," before they even know what the word means. We hand them screens instead of space, distraction instead of attention. And when they grow up confused, anxious, emotionally disconnected, we diagnose and medicate, but rarely ask what they had to suppress just to survive. You learned early that your big feelings were too much, that your sadness made people uncomfortable, that your anger was dangerous, that your joy was silly unless it was productive. So you cut yourself off from the root, your soul, and replaced it with control, with a curated self, with safety. You don't let yourself get too excited anymore because disappointment hurts too much. You don't let yourself cry too hard because you've got work in the morning. You keep it all in check, neat, manageable, but also deadened. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." He was right. We overwork, we overthink, we binge watch, we scroll until our thumbs go numb, not because we're lazy, but because we're terrified of stopping. Terrified of what we might hear in the silence. Because silence speaks, and what it says often contradicts everything we've built our lives upon. In silence, the soul whispers, "This is not what you wanted," but the world shouts, "You're doing great." And between the whisper and the shout, we choose the shout, because it's louder, it's easier, it comes with likes and comments and promotions, but the whisper never goes away. You might silence it for a while, but it waits. Sometimes it slips through the cracks, when you're half asleep or staring out the window or listening to a song that breaks through your defenses. And in those moments, you remember, just briefly, that you once felt more, that there was once a you beneath the performance, a self that didn't need to impress anyone. But memory is dangerous in a world built on forgetting. So we bury it again, with tasks, with plans, with substances, with affirmations that sound deep but mean nothing. Everything happens for a reason. Good vibes only, trust the process. These aren't truths, they're shields. Shields against feeling, against honesty, against soul. And what does a culture look like when it runs on emotional repression? Look around. We're more connected than ever, but lonelier than ever. We have more information, but less wisdom, more comfort, but less peace. We've got mental health apps, therapy podcasts, mindfulness merchandise, and still, we can't sit alone in a room for 10 minutes without reaching for a distraction. Because feeling is the final frontier, and it's terrifying. To feel again means letting the pain rise. It means grieving the years you spent disconnected. It means facing the fact that the life you built may not be the life you want. And that's hard. It's brutal, actually. But it's also the beginning of coming home to yourself. Because your soul doesn't want perfection. It doesn't care about your routine. It doesn't need you to get everything right. It just wants presence. It wants to be acknowledged, to be felt. And every time you numb, you say, not now. Every time you overfunction, overgive, overachieve, you delay the meeting. But what if you stopped? Not completely. Just for a moment. What if you let yourself cry in the middle of the day? What if you turned off your phone without explaining why? What if you said no, not because you had a conflict, but because you had a self? What if you made space to feel? The soul doesn't speak in schedules. It speaks in symbols, in dreams, in art. In the strange urges you get to write something, paint something, scream into a pillow, stare at the moon. None of that makes you productive, but all of it makes you whole. And wholeness, that elusive, unmarketable state, is what you've been aching for all along. Not more stuff, not more achievements, just more you. But the path to you goes through your feelings, through your body, through the parts of yourself you were taught to ignore. And that takes courage. Not the kind you post about, the kind you practice alone, in the dark, when no one's clapping, and slowly you start to unnumb. Not all at once, that would be too much, but gradually, you stop fleeing your sadness, you listen to your anger, you let your joy be weird and inconvenient, you reclaim the full range of being human, and that, ironically, makes you more alive than any success ever could. This is how you begin to remember. The performance of personhood. You don't need a stage to be an actor. In fact, most of us perform every single day without ever realizing it. Not in a Shakespearean way, with soliloquies and costumes, but in the subtle, exhausting dance of being who we think we're supposed to be. We perform confidence when we're falling apart. We perform happiness at parties we didn't want to attend. We perform normal at family dinners, even when nothing about us feels remotely okay. And somewhere along the way, the performance becomes our identity. That's the most dangerous part. Not the mask itself, but the forgetting that it's a mask. We live in a world of roles. Professional roles, social roles, gender roles, cultural expectations. Each comes with a script. Some are spoken, most are silent. You don't remember agreeing to them. They were handed to you by your parents, your teachers, your culture. And you accepted them because, well, everyone else did. And because the alternative, being truly yourself, was never offered as a serious option. It was either adapt or disappear. And so you did the smart thing. You adapted. You became whatever the moment demanded. Polite, charming, ambitious, small, safe. You told yourself this was maturity, responsibility, reality. But deep down, a part of you started to rot. Not dramatically, quietly. The part of you that was spontaneous, that said strange things, that asked inconvenient questions, that didn't care if it made people uncomfortable. That part faded out, not because it was wrong, but because it was unprofitable. You started speaking in cliches, just busy, living the dream, can't complain. You started smiling with your mouth, not your eyes. You started showing up to places where your body was present but your soul had left hours ago, and you got really, really good at it. So good that people looked up to you, admired you, said, "Wow, you really have your life together." And that's when it gets scary. Because when the world rewards the mask, taking it off feels like failure. Admitting that you're lost feels like betrayal. You've built a whole identity on being the strong one, the achiever, the reliable one. So what happens when the real you, messy, confused, alive, starts knocking on the door? You silence it. Because that's what society taught you to do. It taught you that truth is dangerous, that softness is weakness. That vulnerability is only acceptable if it's inspirational and has a neat ending. You're allowed to break down, but only if you package it into a story with a clean moral, preferably one that gets likes. But the soul isn't interested in narratives. It doesn't want to be branded. It just wants to be known, felt, lived. And that's terrifying. Because if you take off the mask, what's underneath? Who's underneath? You've been performing for so long that the idea of simply being, without roles, without scripts, without purpose, feels unbearable. Like standing naked in a room full of people who still have their costumes on. This is where most people stop. Where they say, I'm fine, this is just life. And they put the mask back on, tell themselves it's too late to change, and try to forget the feeling. But the soul doesn't forget. It waits. And every time you betray it, by laughing when you want to cry, by agreeing when you want to scream, it retreats a little further. Not out of punishment, but protection. And yet, it never leaves. Even when you've abandoned it, even when you've buried it under decades of pretending, it's still there, flickering in the background, waiting for you to remember. But remembering comes at a cost. You'll lose people, the ones who only knew the mask. You'll disappoint expectations. You'll be called selfish, dramatic, unstable. You'll question everything. And in return, you'll get something far more dangerous. Yourself. Not your image, not your resume, not your follower count, your actual self. The one who says things you're not supposed to say, who doesn't always make sense, who changes their mind, who cries at sunsets, who believes in things they can't prove, who feels deeply, hurts often, and still chooses to love. That self. It won't fit into most social roles. It won't win at the game of surface-level living, but it will give you back your aliveness. And that, no matter what society tells you, is worth everything. You might still perform, we all do sometimes, but it won't be your only way of being. You'll learn to catch yourself mid-performance and ask, is this true? Not useful, not impressive, just true. You'll start prioritizing depth over approval, meaning over momentum, silence over applause, and slowly you'll begin to build a new kind of life. One not based on roles but relationships, not scripts but sincerity. A life where you can breathe without shrinking, speak without filtering, exist without explaining. This is the radical act in a world of performance, to be real, to stop pretending, to stop marketing yourself, to stop saying I'm fine when you're not, and to start telling the truth, not to everyone, just to yourself. That's enough. That's everything. Because once you tell yourself the truth, even once, the mask starts to crack. And from that crack, light gets in. The quiet return to yourself. There's a strange thing that happens when the soul begins to stir again. It doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It doesn't offer you a 10-step plan or promise you peace by Friday. It arrives quietly, like breath after suffocation. At first, it feels like confusion, a restlessness you can't name. You'll look around at the life you've built, maybe even a life that looks objectively successful, and suddenly it feels foreign. Like walking into your own house and not recognizing the furniture. This is the beginning, the moment when you stop chasing and start noticing. When your soul, long exiled, starts whispering, "Remember me?" But don't expect a perfect reunion. Reconnecting with your soul isn't some glowing, Instagrammable moment. It's awkward, clumsy, sometimes painful. You'll feel like a stranger to yourself. You'll question everything, your job, your values, your relationships. You might feel like you're falling apart, but maybe you're just falling back into something more real. And that's terrifying, because once you begin to feel again, really feel, you can no longer tolerate the fake parts of your life. The empty conversations, the forced smiles, the goals that never belonged to you. You'll start saying no to things that once defined you, and the people around you might not like it. They'll call it a phase. They'll say, "You've changed," as if that's a crime. But you'll know, it's not change, it's return. You're not becoming someone new. You're remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. And that process, it's slow, messy. You'll still play the old roles sometimes, out of habit, out of fear. But more and more, you'll catch yourself. You'll pause before saying yes. You'll stop mid-scroll and ask, why am I doing this? You'll feel the urge to be impressive and gently let it pass. You'll also grieve, a lot, not just people or places, but versions of yourself. The you who tried so hard to belong, the you who smiled through pain, the you who thought success would finally silence the ache. They were trying their best. You'll thank them and let them go, because now you're listening to something deeper. Not the noise of society, but the hum of your own aliveness. This is what Nietzsche might call the process of becoming who you are. Not in the superficial sense of finding your passion, but in the radical act of stripping away everything false until what's left is something raw, untamed, and true. You won't be able to explain this shift to most people. It won't fit into small talk. It won't make sense to those still performing. And that's okay, because the soul doesn't need an audience. It just needs a witness. And that witness is you. You'll start creating not for profit, not for praise, but because it makes you feel alive. You'll walk more, breathe more, cry without needing a reason, laugh when things are still broken. You'll stop waiting for everything to be perfect before letting yourself live. And the world, it won't change. Not right away. It will still reward the mask, still celebrate burnout, still sell you disconnection disguised as freedom. But you'll move differently within it. Softer, slower, less desperate, more real. You'll stop trying to fix yourself and start loving the parts that never asked to be fixed. You'll hold your contradictions gently. You'll realize that the soul doesn't want to be solved, it wants to be seen. And from that seeing, something unexpected will grow. Peace, not the sanitized kind. Not the peace of spa days and scented candles, but the deeper peace of knowing you're no longer betraying yourself. The kind of peace that doesn't need to be loud because it's rooted, and from that root you'll begin again. Not with a dramatic overhaul, but with tiny sacred decisions. You'll choose honesty over harmony, rest over hustle, depth over approval. And in those choices, you'll find your way back to something the world made you forget. Your soul was never broken, only buried, and now, finally, you're unearthing it. Not because someone told you to, not because there's a reward, but because for the first time in a long time, it feels like yours. The ache that never lied. Maybe the soul never actually goes anywhere. Maybe it's been here the whole time, quiet, patient, waiting beneath the noise. Maybe that ache you carry, the one you've tried to silence with logic and productivity, wasn't weakness. Maybe it was the only part of you telling the truth. It's strange, isn't it? How easily we mistake numbness for strength. How we praise ourselves for being able to keep going, even when going feels like erasing. We've made endurance a virtue and silence a survival skill. And then we wonder why we feel so hollow. But now you've paused, just for a moment. And maybe in that pause you've remembered something. Not a fact, not a plan, but a feeling. A quiet sense that you were always meant to be more than useful. That you were once whole before you were polished. That your soul was never a problem, it just didn't fit the system. And that realization isn't comforting. Not in the easy, motivational way. It won't fix everything. It might not fix anything, but it might wake you up. Just enough to notice how far you've drifted. Just enough to want to come home. There's no 5-step plan, no enlightenment hack, just the slow, strange work of listening. Feeling, unlearning, of becoming someone your soul can recognize again. That's not a destination, it's a practice, a quiet rebellion against a world that profits from your disconnection, and maybe, just maybe, that's enough.